Welcome or welcome back to the Moving to Japan podcast. I'm your host, Ziv Nakajima again. And if you're new here, this podcast is dedicated to all of you out there who are either in the process of or thinking about relocating to the land of the rising sun, as well as for those among you who are in the business of relocating others to Japan. So HR managers, global mobility managers, business owners whose business or part of their business is to help employees and their families move to, work, and settle here. Whether you're coming here or relocating employees here for a short period of time or as far as the eye can see, this podcast is for you. We're going to be talking about everything from the move itself to daily life, culture and language barriers and nuances, the logistics of it all, and much, much more. Pick the brain of various industry leaders and experts in their field, all around this topic of moving to Japan. Okay, so for today's episode, this one's coming fast on the heels of our previous conversation with Nick from Japan Remotely just a couple of weeks ago. But the reason we wanted to record this one right now is because Japan has just announced a digital nomad visa that a lot of people were talking about for a long time. And the government says that will be available from April this year, 2024. A lot of people have been waiting for this one, but most of them are actually quite disappointed with it, for a bunch of reasons which we'll be discussing in this episode. Here's our conversation. Yeah, so I think we were going to talk today about what I guess some people see as exciting news, which is the digital nomad visa that has recently been announced by Japan Immigration.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, that's big news. I think a lot of people are thinking about it. So there's definitely been mixed responses that I've seen online, and I think it'd be great for our listeners to hear what we think about it uh, and to think about how it could apply to them potentially for their move to Japan or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So run us through the details. You're the digital nomad expert. So run us through the details of the visa.
Absolutely. So this digital nomad visa is designed for individuals engaged in remote work for foreign entities, and it offers them the ability to stay in Japan for up to 6 months. And it's a short-term visa that has to be applied for. It's not like one of these exemptions. You do have to apply in advance, and one of the main requirements to be able to apply is you need a minimum annual income of 10 million yen, which translates to roughly 68,000 US dollars.
At the moment with current exchange rates.
Exactly. Yeah. And that could fluctuate, of course, drastically. For the longest time, it seemed like 10 million yen was the equivalent of 100,000
right.
US dollars.
In your experience with digital nomads, which is definitely more than mine, how many of them are actually at that income level?
That is a very interesting point that I wanted to bring up, is that what is a digital nomad in the first place? I feel like this visa has a label, digital nomad visa, but it's kind of different from what one might consider to be a digital nomad. I'd almost reclassify this visa as a workation visa. Like you have a full-time job and you want to take a prolonged vacation while doing that in Japan. Whereas I feel like digital nomad to me implies someone who is nomadic, moving from place to place, and ideally for them minimizing their costs while not focusing as much on high income activities, but really earning to the level that will sustain their lifestyle in places like Bali or Thailand or Portugal. So I understand some people have sticker shock about this 10 million JPY with the label of digital nomad visa, because it's a bit incongruous with that term to me. But it's not dissimilar to the threshold that they are having in South Korea as well. They've come out with a digital nomad visa this year, and it's similar, about 65,000 US dollars. But in terms of people who classify themselves as digital nomads, I think most traditional digital nomads will not make it, and I think it's it's clear that this visa is more targeted towards people who have regular jobs or are high income, have assets anyway, that can afford to essentially take a prolonged vacation while checking their company emails.
Right. And the other thing that for me was a bit of a head scratcher is the fact that it's limited to 6 months per 12-month period. So 6 months a year, basically, which, to be perfectly frank, most tourists can get a 3 months extension on the 3 month visitor's visa. So, and without any further requirements. To put it mildly, what's the big deal?
Yeah, I agree that for a lot of people, the 6 months is a confusing amount of time for immigration to choose. Some comments I've heard online is that if you include airfare to go back and forth every 6 months, I mean, that alone is quite costly. Not to mention the fact that each time you apply for this visa,
Mm.
um, you're probably going to want to have a lawyer to look through your paperwork and make sure everything is in order. Um, it's quite the investment of time and money to do every 6 months if that's the game that you're playing is
Oh,
to
that one I
have.
wasn't even aware of. So it's nothing that you can apply for online, like in other countries?
It's to be seen. I am concerned that uh, of the amount of paperwork that's going to be required for them to look at. And it could be like other resident visas, like the investor management visa, where you have to, especially if you're not a full-time employee, you have to talk about your business model and what you're doing. Before it comes out, it's hard to say, but given uh, Japan's bureaucratic tendencies,
Yeah.
I have a feeling that it's not going to be an e-visa. I have a feeling that it's going to be a bit of a hurdle to apply for. Um, so I agree that the most straightforward, especially for visa exempt uh, country holders, which basically a lot of them that are included in these tax treaties with Japan are also in the visa exempt status. It's going to be a much simpler process just to show up. Um, it's going to take a certain type of person uh, that knows in advance that they want to stay for 6 consecutive months, and they want to do everything by the book for some reason or another. Um,
And then maybe
and
not return to their home countries if it's too far, but kind of backpack around Asia for another 6 months before they can come back, right? To
it,
keep
it
costs
could
down low.
it could be. I mean, with South Korea's digital nomad visa lasting 2 years, it could be something where people do have a house in both locations and go back and forth between Japan and South Korea on those visas.
So it's
Um,
almost like they made it a very niche kind of visa option for people in very, very specific situations. I'm just wondering, number one, if that was the intent, and number two, if the kind of profile that will end up applying for this visa is really the one that they're targeting.
I think I think their targeting uh, is going to work because it's from the countries and the salary level and the amount of time. I think what they're doing, like I said, is really targeting those workation type of mostly
Yeah,
employees.
that makes sense, actually. So
Um,
I want to take a year in Asia, and oh, I can also spend half of it in Japan.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it could be especially beneficial for those who are practicing what's called flag theory, which is where as uh, as a high income individual, you have a number of residences around the world, some where you claim as your tax home, and some where you uh, simply stay and work for a given period of time. So one popular website classifies these type of individuals as nomad capitalists, which I think is different from what we classify as a digital nomad. And I think those people as well will be interested in this development, these high income individuals who may want to buy a house in Japan or may want to even open a business in Japan, but don't want to have uh, a residency status here. And I think there's some benefit to that strategy as well from the cultural side. As we both know, living in Japan 12 months out of the year, it definitely has its ups and downs. And if your primary focus is on maintaining your business and having a good time in the countries that you go to, um, perhaps the 6 month limit could be a blessing in disguise where you can keep your love and excitement for Japan without necessarily diving into the challenges that more permanent residents that face.
I agree on a philosophical level, but I mean that should be an option and not being forced to move after 6 months, right?
Yeah, I think it would have been simpler if the Japanese government simply would have had some sort of provision for their existing short-term visa for remote work, um, rather than make a whole new one that's essentially the same as the old one, but has a bunch of uh, requirements.
Strings attached. Yeah, I think it's very similar in that sense to the another couple of visas that were announced. I think what 6 months ago now, the J
Hmm.
Skip and the J Fund
Yes.
visas. So specifically targeting graduates of specific universities or in
Yeah.
specific fields who then get fast tracked through the visa process. So it's almost like I guess it's very inherently Japan in the sense that. Okay, we recognize the need for more immigration or at least more income from foreigners coming into the country. We don't want to open the floodgates of immigration and make,
Exactly.
and let all those gaijins, scary gaijins come in. So let's
Hmm.
like laser focus on a few specific profiles that we think could be good for us without letting too many people in, right?
Yeah. I mean, if we're frank, both all of these programs really target North America, Northern Europe, Australia, New Zealand.
I haven't even thought about that, but that's very correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the countries that they're targeting. And basically, they want those countries to have preferential access to Japan, and they want to limit countries in the global south
And
from
Singapore,
being
I
able.
guess, to a certain
Yeah.
degree, and yeah,
Hmm.
places like that.
Hmm.
It'll be really nice to see, some, I don't know, some African entrepreneur with a lot of money and time on their hands, and his bunch of cohorts who are taking advantage of this visa. Sorry, it's just like the devil's advocate in me. But yes, I think you're 100% right. Mm.
It also depends on if those countries have that tax treaty in place with Japan. I think there's 49 countries that have the reciprocal tax agreements with Japan.
So, what is the tax situation for people who do take advantage of this visa? Are they going to be taxed in Japan at all? Not at all? A partial tax? How does that work?
That remains to be seen. But my personal feeling is that one of the big reasons they aren't making this visa longer than 6 months is they wanted to punt on that whole issue. They didn't want to try to track a bunch of foreigners' remote income. And so they made the cutoff at 6 months for the visa because that's also the cutoff for when they
Tax
start
residency. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a tax residency.
Right.
So I think that's the reason, one big reason that it's 6 months. And I think that participants on this digital nomad visa program, should they choose to do it, in most cases will not face tax issues on their foreign income.
Mm.
Now, a lot of what I'm concerned about for this digital nomad visa and what remains to be seen is what if, let's say, it's a blogger or influencer that comes to Japan and writes about Japanese things, eats at Japanese restaurants, hires Japanese guides. This is working in Japan. I
Yeah.
mean, so so what about those situations where the audience is clearly foreigners? It's like they're providing a form of entertainment, escapism to people who live abroad and wish they could come to Japan and do all these wonderful things. But the product that they're making and the thing that they're doing, there's essentially their supply of information and entertainment is coming from Japan.
I
In those
suppose if
situations,
it's a foreign company and generating income which is not generated in Japan by Japanese clientele, probably not an issue, at least taxation wise, I'd say.
yeah, yeah, hopefully. I suppose to play devil's advocate to that, what if they did have a significant Japanese following? What if,
Yep.
yeah, what if they did Japanese language as well as English? I mean, again, we're getting into the niche level here, but what I'm saying is I fear that with the digital nomad visa and the admission that you are working, there's not a 0% chance that you won't be taxed, is what I think. I think there could be some situations where as you go through this, it would be important to talk to an immigration lawyer or an accountant
Mm.
to say, I'm going to do this. Some of my activities are like this. What do you think? And I think that would be worth a consultation about.
At least another thing to be seen is if once you've received this visa, if you want to come back next year, is it a matter of renewing it, reapplying with, some of the criteria already have been met, so you don't have to go through the entire review process. It'll be interesting to see how they process the visa once
Yeah.
it's done.
Yeah, it would be great if they had something like the APEC card
Yeah.
where you have, or maybe they could even integrate with that system in your APEC profile, have you being registered as having a certain level of income. And wouldn't it be great if you could just show up with that card and walk right through and say, um,
I've been here before. This is just me
this
coming back in. Yeah.
this is just me coming back in and I haven't been here for 12 months and I'm starting again. But yeah, I think that would be great if they could do that. Especially since the infrastructure there already.
Mm. Okay, so you've mentioned you're obviously more in touch, finger on the pulse with the digital nomads community. You've mentioned mixed reviews. Have people you've been talking to saying that they are planning to potentially take advantage of it, are thinking about it? It's like, what the hell is this? No way. Or what was the general mindset?
The general mindset is that the 6 months is too short. Um, and there was a lot of disappointment, I feel like. Um, especially for those in the digital nomad community. I think those in especially the tech and the remote working community that want to uh, spend a longer time in Japan. Um, I haven't heard, oh yes, I want to do this yet,
Mm.
because I don't think they really understand why it's a good thing and why they should do it. Because like we already said, there's already a visa exemption where they could just show up. Um, Another concern that I have, speaking of just showing up, is now that there is an official path to um, visit Japan while working remotely, will there be more scrutiny when people come to visit on a regular short-term visa or visa exemption regarding what their activities are going to be, and more work done by Japanese immigration and to try to make sure that people follow this new guideline and that they have
Oh, so you're thinking
created.
it might make it actually more challenging for the normal visitors, for the tourists?
I'm concerned that that could happen. Now, does Japan have the resources to go and look through everybody's emails and make sure they're not emailing their boss and emailing their friends instead. I mean, it's going to be challenging. But um, so far, to be honest, I have never heard of a case personally where someone has been caught um, for coming in on a visa exemption or a short-term stay and working remotely discreetly in Japan. I've
Hmm.
heard rumors of people being deported for doing that, but I've never myself heard of that. So I wonder if now that there is an official path, there's going to be a more uh, a deeper look by immigration on those coming into Japan for months at a time.
Hmm.
But I
So
mean, realistically, how are you supposed to go to Japan even for 3 months without having some sort of handle on your income? I mean,
yeah.
you can't just stop. Most people can't.
Yeah, where do you
Um,
draw the line? Is checking on your investments overseas considered working? Is talking to
yeah,
somebody who's taking care of your business in your absence considered working? I mean, so many gray zone. But I guess this entire conversation is like questions, right? We don't really have any
yeah.
clear answers to anything.
I think one answer we have is about intent. And I think that's a big, not just Japan immigration issue, but immigration issue in general, is Japan has set out a visa path for people whose primary intent, their first intent, is to go to Japan for the purpose of working remotely. So I think in again, that situation is a bit rare. Like, who's going to come to Japan and hold himself up in a hotel room for 6 months and work remotely because it's cheaper? They're obviously going to be mixing travel with that situation. Um, but with the short-term visa and the visa exemption, I feel like as long as the primary intent is to do what that visa says, to travel, to visit family, do tourism. Um, as long as that lines up, I feel like it will be rare that Japan cracks down on somebody checking their work emails in Japan.
Hmm. Okay, well, again, a lot of questions, not that many answers yet, but I guess we'll have to see number one, once they flesh it out, what exactly are all of the little, what's the fine print on the visa? And
Yeah.
secondly, who's actually going to raise their hand and go for it? It'll be interesting to see. Did they say when it was going to be officially available?
I think April 1st.
Okay, so they don't have that much time to flesh it out. Okay.
No, yeah. Yeah, not much time left. So it may be a situation where over a number of years they refine it as well. I read also that potentially for the investor management visa, they're going to relax some of those capital investment requirements for those visas as well.
I wish they'd
Um,
relax the minimum annual income required for renewal. It's not an official condition, but
yeah,
from immigration lawyers I speak to, if you're not making a minimum of 3.5 million yen and hopefully more than that, it's
mhm.
just not going to be renewed, which is, I mean, when you're building a business from the ground up, the first couple of years could definitely be lower than that. And a lot of people will end
Oh
up
yeah,
just starting up and not being able to continue.
yeah, and think about all that work it is to get that visa in the first place, and
And
then having
expenses.
to
Yeah.
say bye bye to that.
Mm.
I know in your projects you do a lot of work with the investor management visa track option.
Yeah.
Um, in in your projects for the digital nomad visa, do you think that it's an option for some of your clients that they would take a look at and from your client book, or do you think it's not going to be interesting for them? What's your feel?
The only people that I see from our clientele who could potentially take advantage of that, and we've mentioned them when we recorded our previous conversation, are the people who already have a business overseas that is generating income that they can comfortably
Hmm.
assume will be at that level at the end of the first year. And then they
Hmm.
could come here on the digital nomad visa test out the working conditions for 6 months while still billing people from the overseas company or corporate structure,
Mhm.
whatever they have there. And then at the end of those 6 months, decide, okay, well, yes, it makes sense for me to live here and continue working as I've been working. It's now time to set up a company and start billing them through the Japanese entity instead. So people who want to test the waters before actually going through the motions and applying for and paying for setting up a Japanese company and switching over their income stream to Japan, then yes, for them it would make more sense than coming here on other visas to do that.
Okay. What about on the Nippon trading sides of things for people who are interested in buying a house? I know that you guys do a great job in facilitating that process remotely for foreign buyers. With this new 6-month visa, do you foresee some of those clients having a longer stay in Japan and potentially working with you on the ground to go and look at those houses and scouting their locations? What do you think about potential home buyers? Do you think the digital nomad visa would be interesting for some of them?
It could potentially be interesting because, again, we don't have the details, but I'm assuming having a digital nomad visa would enable you to register your address at City Hall, and get an address certificate. If that's not going to be the case, then no,
Mm,
there's no difference whatsoever. Because once you
okay.
have that address certificate, then a lot of things open up. You can more
Mm,
easily open a bank account. You can more easily get various utilities and services. Without that, it's honestly just a glorified tourist visa. It wouldn't make much of a difference for the home buyers.
except for the length of time, I guess. If they wanted to do their home buying over 6 consecutive months and maybe had a certain plan to look at different options over that period of time. But
But again, most people
s-
can just renew the tourist visa without even having to leave the
yeah,
country for another 3 months, or at worst, maybe, hop over to Korea for the weekend and come back and then have it
mhm,
extended there, right?
that's true.
Mm,
Yeah, why go through all that trouble?
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, okay, is it going to cost me, $200 to go to Korea and apply there, or is it going to cost me $1,000 to get a lawyer to apply for the digital nomad visa?
Yeah, that's true. It for regular home buyers, it probably wouldn't make much sense unless they had some sort of specific reason to continue working, maybe in a very public way. Like maybe uh s- someone who's very senior in their organization and the organization is quite well known. And if they were in Japan for an extended period, it would be obvious that um,
They're
and
working.
public information that they're
Yeah.
working.
Yeah.
But again, that's a very niche
Super niche. Yeah.
situation. Yeah, yeah. Head of Ford Motors comes over for 6 months, and how many of those guys are there?
No, not that many. And honestly, it would be fairly easy for them to claim that they're not working because at that level, you can take a sabbatical for 6 months, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. All right. Well, interesting stuff. Remains to be seen. We'll see how we go.
yeah. I think it's a interesting development. I think it's better than nothing. I think it's a good step forward, especially for people who are interested in staying in Japan for longer periods of time consistently, especially if they're going to be homeowners and have assets in Japan but don't want to live there full time. Um, I think for those risk averse people, it could make sense for them to say, I'm here in my house and I'm working abroad and I have permission to do that.
Yeah. And look, hopefully it will be because that tends to be the case in other Japanese official endeavors. It may be a preliminary attempt at testing the waters and then expanding to something a bit more robust, right?
Yeah, it could be. One concern is, of course, the history of the uh, highly skilled professionals visa and how there is such high expectations for that track, and in terms of popularity, it never really got off the ground, and wasn't really amended until very recently with the JSkip and the JFind, and even those are, like we talked about, very niche situations even further.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know if it will get better, but maybe they'll invent some other niche situation for
Yeah.
people with remote income to come.
I actually, the one I was most surprised about is that the retirement visa never extended beyond the 1 year, once in a lifetime. I mean, those are people who would obviously have the
Yeah.
resources to sit here and spend money in Japan and pay taxes in Japan, and still they want them out after a year. It's that one I really don't get.
Yeah, I think the retirement visa is a no-brainer, is especially um, with Japan's aging population, uh, having other elderly people from different countries, they'd all have time to do koryu and have a good time. I don't know.
All right, we'll revisit it again when we have more details, I suppose. Thanks for your time again.
Yeah, thanks for talking about this news with me, Siv.
Yeah, so not exactly what people were expecting, to say the least. And as we mentioned, if we're lucky, maybe a preview of better things to come. What are your thoughts about it? Let us know in the comments section or wherever you found this episode. We'd love to know what you think. Now, if you found value in this podcast, we'd really love it if you could like, subscribe, and even better, share the episode with anyone in your network who might also find value in it. And of course, leave us a review or a comment wherever you might have found this podcast. Your word of mouth is our oxygen, and it helps us reach more and more and more people who might find value in the topics that we cover here. We love hearing from you. And of course, if you want to be on the podcast, either as a sponsor, we can definitely put you in the ears of anyone interested in moving to Japan, or even better, as a guest, either via recorded conversation or just send in your questions, audio, video, written form. We'll try to give you the answers you're looking for. Just drop us a line here in the comment section or via DM or on email, info@nipponbridge.com. That's INFO, info@NIPPON, nipponbridge.com. All one word. We want to know what you think. Hope to have you with us again next time. And until then, have a great day or night ahead. Yoroshiku.